Hello and welcome to Thoughts on Rice, a podcast hosted by the University of California Cooperative Extension Rice Advisors. I'm one of your hosts, Sarah Marcianish, and I'm a rice farm advisor for Colusa and Yolo counties.
I'm Whitney Brim DeForest. I'm the Cooperative Extension Rice Advisor for Sutter, Yuba, Placer, and Sacramento counties.
My name is Luis Espino. I'm the Rice Farming Systems Advisor for Butte and Glenn counties.
I'm Michelle Leinfelder-Miles. I'm a farm advisor in the Delta region. I work on all sorts of field crops, grains and forages, but one of those is rice. And the counties that I cover are San Joaquin, Sacramento, Yolo, Solano, and Contra Costa counties.
Together, the UCCE Rice Farm Advisors seek to provide relevant, topical, research-backed information relating to California rice production. As of recording, it is officially the beginning of July. And so, kind of on theme with that, we're sitting down with Luis Espino to talk about the fate of armyworms in rice, as we're approaching the first peak of armyworm population in the 2025 rice season. Last year, we had a podcast episode devoted to the second peak of armyworm infestation. So if you're interested in hearing more about that, you can go find that in our back catalog. The armyworm is an insect commonly found in rice fields, and it becomes a pest when populations reach high densities. Prior to 2015, we hadn't had record of high effects of armyworm defoliation in rice. However, a serious armyworm outbreak occurred in 2015, resulting in yield reductions of up to 20% in some fields. After 2015, research efforts focused on controlling this armyworm and actually led to the registration of a chemical being able to be used for control of this pest. Now, infestation pressure fluctuates throughout the years, and it's hard to tell if a year is going to be a heavy armyworm year prior to it actually showing some damage. But it's important to remain vigilant, especially at this time of year. And first and foremost, always scout the fields, keep an eye out, and see if there's any worms or severe defoliation in the field. Hi, Luis. Thanks for being here today.
Hi, Sarah.
Now, I'm here to talk to you about pretty much everyone's favorite mid-season pest, which is the armyworm. As a recording, it's the beginning of July, and so this is kind of about the time we want to be, we're kind of past the time of starting to think about armyworms, but now's when we should be really starting to focus on it, right?
Right. Yeah, we're probably just on the other side of the armyworm, the larval peak. So actually, this morning we were counting worms on a trial. And we started, this is our 1 week count. So we did counts at 3 days and then a week ago. And yeah, our numbers went up quite a bit from our first count on the untreated. But I'm guessing, given the size of the worms, they're starting to pupate. So they're probably the numbers are going to start going down now.
Pretty large worms then that you were seeing.
Pretty large, yes.
And the worms that you were seeing, for the most part, they were all armyworm. They weren't fall armyworm. They were our traditional true armyworm.
Right, yeah. We don't have full armyworm. It is the true armyworm, the one that we always see on rice. Occasionally, we can also see western yellow striped armyworm. But when I have seen the western yellow striped, it has always been on the Dak salad or maybe on the red stem and is eating those weeds, but not the rice. So it likes to eat the broadleaf weeds and not rice. And so, yeah, I think, in the past, we always said that both were a pest of rice. At least in the past, 15 years, it's only been the true armyworm.
That's good. Okay, so maybe we should be promoting western yellow striped armyworms.
Well, no, I wouldn't do that. No, but they're an armyworm too, so they have that same behavior where they move, in mass into areas where they can feed on. And I've seen them move into alfalfa fields, for example, a few years ago. And so, yeah, I don't know if they were to have an outbreak like that and they were to move into rice, they might feed on the rice. Sometimes, insects, if there's nothing left, nothing else they can eat, they might eat whatever's available and they might eat the rice. But so far, I haven't seen them eating rice.
Well, let's hope it stays that way. As far as what you've been seeing, you mentioned a trial that you were working on earlier today, and I'll tell you, I've been out and about a little bit, and at the rice experiment station and some fields I've been in lately, I've been seeing not a lot of defoliation, but a lot of inch or smaller sized worms. Does that kind of concur with what you've been seeing?
Yeah, so yes, we've seen this year certainly more worms than the past 2 or 3 years. And it's not outbreak levels, and it is spotty. Some fields you see large numbers, other fields you don't see very many. There could be a little bit of a difference between areas. So we have one of these fields that we monitor constantly in Richville, and over there we saw worms very early on, and they reached, they were pretty large. By now they're probably gone. Well, that field had to be sprayed because defoliation was pretty, it wasn't a threshold level, but it was really approaching threshold level. So yeah, those worms were a little bigger. So, then one of the fields that we monitor, we ended up setting up a trial there, and those worms were a little behind, but now they're cycling, they're getting to the point that they will be cycling out.
And then kind of touching on that, because you mentioned a lot of the different sites that you're tracking these numbers in as part of the Armyworm monitoring network. Is that right?
Yeah. So yes, the monitoring network. So we use the pheromone traps, and we have these 15 sites, and we check them every week. And then we look at the number of moths that we're catching in the traps. And so, we've done this for several years now. Maybe we're approaching maybe 8, 9 years. And so we've learned that, the number of moths really doesn't give us much information. Some years we find huge number of moths in the traps, but then there's no worms in the field. And we can talk about why later. But we've learned that what really gives us the most important information is when we reach the peak of moths in the traps. And so when we reach that peak, we know that week and the following week is when we're going to see the peak number of worms, of larvae in the field. And so, when you have high numbers of worms, those are the ones that are going to be defoliating and potentially causing damage. And that's when it's going to be easier to find them. So that's how we recommend using the traps, or the information from the traps is, once you identify, okay, we're at peak, or we reached the peak last week, because we check it every week, so we know the peak happened last week. Then that's the time to really monitor closely, look for worms, and if needed, a treatment can be made.
Yeah, so I guess kind of to distill it down, the traps are a really good way of seeing if there's a presence of moths, but not necessarily the number of worms that might be in the field.
Right. Yeah. So what we've seen is that the number of worms varies. Like every field is different. So say we find 50 moths a night in field A, 50 moths a night in that field may mean 2 worms per square foot. But on field B, 50 moths a night might mean 8 worms per square foot. So it changes. So we can make a recommendation based on the number of moths because of that. So now, why is that? The pheromone we use for the armyworm traps, for the moth traps, is a pheromone that attracts males. And so the males, will mate with the females, and the females then lay their eggs. But we're not catching the females, which are the ones that will carry eggs. Now this is interesting. Now we know in nature that the ratio of male-female is 1-to-1. So in theory, if there's 100 males flying around, there should be 100 females flying around. So these armyworms, they are migratory. And so they move, across the landscape. I suspect that they move into our area, coming probably from Southern California, maybe other areas south of us. And they move into our area, and then they will continue moving north and go all the way to Canada. And so what happens, and there's a recent paper that was published this year, actually, where they from some workers in Quebec in Canada. And so they were trapping armyworms using light traps. So the light traps should attract males and females equally, but they were getting more males than females. And so what they have been able to deduct from that information is that the movement of moths is not 1-to-1. So the males will move and they will fly, while the females might be migrating, but then they might need to stop if they're ready to lay eggs. And so they might stop in some areas to mate, lay eggs, but the males will continue moving. And so that difference seems to be why some years, we might get a lot of moths, a lot of male moths, but then there's no worms. It's because there's not enough females out there. There's very few females. I'm sure, when I say few, I'm sure there's thousands of millions, right? But there's not the number of females that would cause an outbreak, right? So I think that kind of solves that mystery. So why are we not, even though we catch so many moths, why are we not seeing worms in the field? And it might be related to that. So that I really enjoyed reading that paper.
That sounds like a really interesting paper. We'll be sure to link to that in the show notes for anybody who wants to read that further.
It's a paper from Lemire Hamel. That's the last name of the main author, and it's on the Canadian Entomologist in 2025. So anyway.
Could it be, is it that there are fewer females, or just that the females are less mobile?
Well, I'll have to go back and read, but I think there's fewer females arriving at certain locations, when they're migrating. And once the females go into reproductive mode, they might not move as much because they have to conserve energy to produce eggs. And so they might not fly as long or, as the distances that the males do, because the males don't need to save energy.
No, they're kind of done doing their part. They just need to fly.
Right. They just fly, and hope that the females are around when they get wherever they're going. Right. Yes.
Well, that's really neat. I mean, like you said, potentially a mystery cracked at least a little bit to see maybe something worthy of more investigation.
Right. It makes sense. And that this kind of explains why we don't always see huge populations, even though we see a lot of moths.
Well, okay. Kind of going back to this tracking network, I'm looking at it here, and it looks like across the area where we do the monitoring, it looks like some of the trap areas haven't hit their peak moth captures as of last week. Some of them are approximately at peak, and then some of them saw their peak a couple of weeks ago even. I mean, do we have an explanation for that, or is that just all part of the variability we see?
So I think there's variability. So within a field, sometimes, in each field that we monitor with the traps, we have 3 traps. And so even within a field, some traps, peak maybe a week earlier than other traps. So there is some spatial variability, even at the trap level. But I think that there might be also some differences in geographic areas. So like I was saying earlier, we have this field in Richville where we saw early on maybe a little bit more activity on the worms versus other fields not a little bit to the east, not still in the area, but closer to Biggs. And this other field was a little behind. So I think there might be some geographic differences. Now, why? I can't, I can't say what makes one field different than another. And it's the same reason why some fields tend to see high numbers versus other fields don't seem to have a lot of worms in them. Yeah, I don't know what the reason is, but there are some differences like that. So important to scout, pay attention to if there's information from the area, you can pay attention to that. But I think in general, the average that we send out with the email, with the updates on the trapping, the average, what we send is the average for the whole valley. And that gives a good idea of, where the populations are.
Well, you mentioned scouting. Let's kind of get into that a little bit. Do you have recommended techniques for what time of day to scout, what area of the field or the basin to scout? Anything you want to touch on here?
Well, so, the scouting is you got to look for defoliation, but also you got to look to see if there's worms, right? You don't want to see defoliation, but maybe the worms already cycled out. So, let's say you come back from 4th of July weekend next week, and you might see some defoliation, but the worms might have already cycled out. So there's no point in doing any treatment. So look for worms. Look at the base of the canopy. The worms like to hide, especially in places where there's thick rice, and they like to be parallel to the tillers. And so those thick areas, that's where they're hiding. So I know some growers like to shake the rice and see how many fall in the water, and that works too. But you might miss the ones that are right at the base of at the water level. Just hiding there in the tillers. And usually we see higher densities in the borders. It seems like that's where the infestation starts. So if you're scouting, you can check those areas to see how it's doing, but always take a look further, walk a little bit into the field, because there might not be that many once you go, 40, 50 feet into the field. So I think that would be what I recommend. The other thing, sometimes I get the question, because the threshold is by defoliation. So if we want to avoid getting to higher than 25% defoliation, which is a little tricky. What is 25%? You just kind of you have to guesstimate. You can also count the worms, right? And a lot of people do that. It gives you another parameter. So a few years ago, we did that. We did a study where we were counting worms and trying to correlate that to defoliation level. And whenever we had more than 6 armyworms per square foot, then we would start seeing defoliation that was close to 25%. So that's an informal threshold, because we did it, but we didn't have enough samples with high levels of defoliation. This year would have been a good year to do that, but we were not planning on doing it. But if you're seeing more than 6, certainly if you're seeing 10, more than 10, then that's concerning, and either keep a really close eye on the rice, or if you're seeing some important defoliation, then maybe consider a treatment. This year's is tough, with the prices, but you can wait. So that's the other thing is, you can wait. One of the insecticides that we have registered, methoxyphenoside, that's a good job of controlling the armyworm quickly. So, you spray, and it's not going to be immediate, but, at 3 days, you'll see a good reduction. A week later, you will see more than 90% control. So that's the good thing about having a good product that works, is that, you can wait until you are actually sure that you need to treat. You want to avoid, those preventive applications that sometimes, because we had, with pyrethroids that were not working very well, some people were trying, well, maybe if we put it early, we'll get those little ones. but you don't know if you're really going to need a treatment or not. So we want to get away from that.
Yeah, not just spraying because you think you might need it, actually spraying when it's economical and most effective against the pest, and using a product that can do that.
Right. And we have a product that can do that. So that's good.
Rice is really pretty tolerant of defoliation. I mean, especially at this stage, right? This first peak of armyworms. Is that, I mean, even if you've got 10, 15% defoliation, is there going to be an effect on yield later on the season?
No, we've done trials where we defoliated rice. Now we did it artificially because we couldn't have,
You couldn't raise armyworms to graze your rice. Yeah.
It's hard to find places where you could have different defoliation levels. So we defoliated rice. We just used scissors and we did it across several days to try to mimic how the armyworm does it. And if we lose 25% of the foliage, we don't see a yield reduction. But if we lose 50%, then we start seeing a percent reduction. And when we did it for 3 years. I think on average, we were losing 4% of yield when we defoliated 50%. So if you imagine a field that's eaten half, you will lose, or an area that's eaten half, you will lose about, if the field produces 100 sacks, you're losing 4 sacks.
Which, I mean, granted, it's not insignificant, but 50% defoliation, that's huge. That's a really large amount.
It's huge. And it looks very scary. It looks terrible, right? But the rice is tough, and it can, it loses some, but it's not going to lose all. When we defoliated the rice all the way to the water level, so we cut it all the way to the water, as best as we could. There's always some leaving that stayed above the water. Then we would find a good 25% yield reduction when we do that.
And that would be 100% defoliation estimate.
That's what we would call 100%, yeah. And so we saw that, in 2015, right? 2015, when we had the outbreak, some areas were just, eaten to the water, and so those fields probably saw a yield reduction. But yeah, rice is pretty tough, and so it can take a lot of defoliation. The issue is, if these worms are eating and you're already losing about a quarter of your foliage, they can eat a lot very quickly. And so you don't want to get anywhere more than 25%. So that's why we make the threshold 25% defoliation. You don't want to get to 50% because then we know you're going to lose yield.
Let's say we've got a field, we think we're approximately 25% defoliation. We've still got worms in the field that we're seeing. What kind of, control methods or management options are there for a grower? Maybe starting cultural methods. Let's talk about those first. Does that primarily center around early season weed management? Or I guess that'd be before you see the worms, but.
Yeah, I think, early season weed management will have an effect, I think. We haven't done a formal study on this, but I mean, many times if you walk a field, you'll see the watergrass, is all eaten up. They'll eat the watergrass. And a lot of times, it seems like after propanil sprays, those worms that were on the watergrass kind of move to the rice or start eating the rice. That's kind of just an observation, we haven't done, like I said, a formal study, but it seems to be that way. So I think, grassy fields might offer a variety of diet for the armyworms. So that might play a role. But if you get them, and there's a high number of them, and the defoliation is high, there's not much else we can do other than an insecticide.
And I think we've got. You've already mentioned the chemical name of what we call Intrepid. That's the trade name. And then there's also another one, different chemical name that I can't think of right now, but Dimilin. But that one has a different pre-harvest interval. Is that right?
Yeah, Dimilin. So Dimilin is also a good armyworm product. It works well. It's a little slower than Intrepid, but it does give control. Yeah, it's got an 80-day pre-harvest interval, so you have to be careful about how late you can put it on. So on a typical armyworm year and on a typical rice planted, planting year, you can still use it for defoliation. But once we get into the second flight and the heading, then if there was a need for an insecticide, you couldn't use it then. So yeah, so we have in the Intrepid, Dimilin, the pyrethroids that are common for other pests are really, they do not work for armyworms. So I would discourage people to use them at all, because we've done trials, we've seen fields sprayed, we've seen pyrethroids combined with propanil. See if you can, maybe control them when they're small, but they just don't work.
Yeah, and so in you'd just be kind of throwing money away if you tried to treat armyworms with pyrethroids.
Pretty much, yeah. It's not doing anything.
Now, what if I'm an organic grower? Because these are obviously chemicals that are used in conventional farming systems. But if you're an organic grower who's got a problem with armyworms, are there options out there for them?
Well, you can use the BT products. They're not very effective. Over the years, we've seen up to 50% of efficacy. They just don't work as well, because by the time we see the worms and we make the decision to treat, the worms are too big. The small worms, when BT would be more effective, a lot of times we just don't see them. It's really hard to see them in rice. They're hard to find. So it kind of misses that window. And at that time also, we don't know if, it's going to be enough population to cause defoliation. So it's challenging. The tools for organic growers are not the best. But the BTs are available and they will reduce the population somewhat, but it's not going to be as effective as the chemical options.
Is there anything, I guess, in terms of research on armyworms that you're working on this year or in recent years?
Well, this year, mentioning earlier, we did an insecticide trial, and so there is a product that we're hoping it's going to be available soon, maybe next year, and it works as good as Intrepid. So it will give us and it's a different mode of action, so it'll give us a really good rotational alternative. We looked at another product also that's a biological. It's a fungus that would colonize the armyworm and kill him. But unfortunately, it did not really do much. So,
oh man, because that sounds exciting.
Right. Yeah. These products work in other systems, but again, rice is just not very good. It's the way we use these products don't work as well.
Yeah, it's just rice is interesting in a lot of ways. A lot of things that might work in other row crops don't tend to always transfer over.
Right. Yes.
Well, Luis, thanks for talking with me today. Anything else you want to bring up while we're on?
I think, like I said earlier, we're seeing more worms than the past few years. I think growers should keep that in mind. We're already past that first peak, but there's a second one, and we'll see if those populations track this first infestation, and if they do, just keep an eye on the field. The second one's a little trickier because the injury occurs on the panicle, and once it happens, there's no reducing that. Once the injury is done, is done. But we don't know exactly at what point it happens. Does it happen as the panicle's coming out? Can it happen once the panicle's out and it's already filled? And what is the window of susceptibility? We haven't been able to determine that. So I think it's just a matter of being aware that, okay, there might be some worms, and just keep an eye on it.
That's a great note, Luis. And actually, I'll link the episode we did last year on the second peak of armyworms in the show notes. So if people want to just get a nice 1-2 punch of first peak, second peak armyworms, we'll have that ready for them.
Okay, Great.
Well, Luis, thank you so much. And we will see you around.
No problem.
We've got a couple of upcoming events that are rapidly approaching. The first event that's up on our schedule is the Rice Production Workshop, which is a workshop we hold every 2 years to cover the basic principles and practices of rice production in California. This event will take place July 23rd and July 24th, 2025. This is a 2-day workshop. These will be 2 all days, so it will start at 8:30 a.m. and go till 3:30 p.m. and take place at the UC A&R building on 2801 2nd Street in Davis. Registration is required for this event, and if you go to our UC Rice website, there is a link for that registration. Our next upcoming event will be the Weedy Rice Workshop, which will take place August 5th, 2025, from 10 a.m. to 1:15 p.m. at the Roberts Union Farm Center in Stockton, California. This will be a workshop devoted to the history and current management practices of weedy rice in California. Registration is not required for this event. Our final upcoming event for this season is the annual Rice Field Day, which takes place every year on the last Wednesday of August, which is August 27, 2025. It starts promptly in the morning, so be sure to get your coffee and donuts when the field day starts, and it will take place at the Rice Experiment Station at 955 Butte City Highway in Biggs. And as always, stay tuned for some great talks and a delicious lunch. For more information about these and other upcoming events, feel free to check out our resources, which include the UC Rice blog and the UC Agronomy Rice website. In terms of other resources you may want to take advantage of, you can also look at our newsletters, which include Rice Briefs, which covers Clusiolo, Rice Notes, which covers Yuba Sutter, Rice Leaf, which covers Butte and Glen, and Field Notes, which covers rice in the Delta region of California. Thanks for listening to Thoughts on Rice, a University of California Cooperative Extension podcast from University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources. You can find out more about this podcast on our website, thoughtsonrice.buzzsprout.com. We'd love to hear from you, whether it's from using our text link in the show notes, a survey submission in our feedback form, also in the show notes, or in a comment or rating on your podcast streaming service of choice. You can also email us with any comments, questions, or concerns at thoughtsonrice@ucdavis.edu. Thanks for sticking with us over this planting hiatus earlier this spring. Rice season is well underway, and we hope you stay safe this season. And remember, like the growers like to say, have a rice life. Mention of an agrochemical does not constitute a recommendation, merely the sharing of research findings. Always follow the label is the law. Find out more at ipm.ucanr.edu. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the speaker's own, and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of the University of California. The material and information presented here is for general purposes only. The University of California name and all forms and abbreviations are the property of its owner, and its use does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific organization, product, or service.